Hello everyone, my name is Abhilasha and I'm a VRC educator on Unacademy, and welcome to this session of Skill Builder VRC, where we are going to be talking about structure and the next idea questions in reading comprehension. Let's not waste any time and let's get started. So my name is Abhilasha. I've been teaching for the last 22 years. I have cracked a 99.99 percentile in CAT VRC 9 times. I've co-authored a book called Quantitative Aptitude and Reasoning. I've taught over 1 lakh students in exams such as CAT, CLAT, GMAT, GATE, Bank PO, SSC and so on. If you wish to connect with me, all you have to do is connect with me on Telegram using MBA CAT 23, or if you wish to subscribe to Unacademy, you can use my code, that's AbhiCat Live. Remember to hit like, share, subscribe and the bell icon if you haven't yet done it. Alright, what is the agenda of today's class? Well, we will be talking about the structure of passages. We will be talking about the next idea questions and also how to solve these. And as always, there will be a bonus section also. Now, what is a structure question? Well, this thing or this question you will find very relevant in certain areas, especially when they ask you, okay, what is the next idea or what is the writer going to write in the next paragraph, or why has the writer written the third paragraph, or what is the purpose of the writer behind writing such and such lines. So if you understand the structure of the passage, then it becomes very easy for you to realize what is he trying to write, how is he writing, and what will be the sequence of thought or the flow of thought, right? So therefore, understanding the structure of a passage becomes very, very important for us. The next idea question type is something that that was very visible in CAT over the last few years. This year and last year it hasn't appeared, but the next idea question essentially asks you to identify what will be the next idea, what the writer will be writing in the next paragraph. So it is more about understanding what he is writing, understanding the structure of the passage, and therefore extrapolating what the next idea should be. So therefore, the structure questions or the next idea questions are all based on the same thing, that what is the flow of thought in a particular passage and how the writer is taking forward the thoughts in the passage. How to solve, of course, we understand, and there is a bonus section like always, so as promised. The structure of the passage, let's learn a little bit about the structure of the passage. So what is the structure of an RC and why do we have different structures for different RCs? Well, chronology, sequential, comparison, contrast, analytical, exploratory, these are a few possible and probable structures that we do find in reading comprehension. Now let's understand why would you why do different articles have different structures? Imagine yourself as a writer. Okay, imagine that you're a writer and you're trying to make you're trying to write something. Now suppose I give you certain topics. Let's say I tell you, please write about the let's say I tell you, write about your summer vacation. So what are you going to do? You're going to describe the summer vacation. So maybe the first paragraph will be when it started, how it started, where you went, and then you will get into the descriptions and all, right? So it will so this will be probably a descriptive essay. I could ask you to write about maybe how you would do, how would you make a particular recipe, or how would you make a particular dish. In which case you would do it step by step. So you would say step 1 is this, step 2 is this, step 3 is this, step 4 is this, step 5 is this, final step is this. So you would then be doing things sequentially. So the writing also will be very sequential. Sometimes what will happen is I will ask you, or maybe your the person who's giving you the topic would say, hey, why don't you write about the India's independence struggle? So then what you will do is you will take a chronology. You will say, hey, this is when it happened. This is when the next thing happened. This is when the third thing happened. And you will follow a chronology or a date-wise sequence as to when what happened. Okay. Sometimes somebody might just ask you to identify or spot the differences between two things. Or maybe there can be an article which would ask you, okay, what is the difference in India's approach and China's approach towards the climate crisis? Okay, so then you would probably do a comparison or a contrast. Sometimes they may just ask you, okay, what is just tell about something, so you may just be in a narrative structure. So depending on what you're writing about, the structure of the RC will change. See, generally when you write anything, generally when we write anything, how do we write? We write whatever we are writing in three parts. So there is always an introduction. The introduction is followed by a body, right? And then it is followed by a conclusion. So whatever generally if you write it like this. So let us say I'm talking about the approach of India versus China in let's say the climate crisis. So we will talk about that here. We will introduce the topic here. What is the Indian approach, what is the Chinese approach? Then we will start the comparison and or the contrast. Let's say there are four things that I want to tell you. So I'll make four paragraphs or I'll make two paragraphs and I'll list them P1, P2, P3, P4, right? And that's how. And then finally I'll sum up everything in the conclusion. So this is a general structure. But this will work only in certain RCs, not in all RCs. Let us say I tell you that you have to, like I said, I tell you to write how to make a cup of tea. So now the cup of tea process cannot be the same as a comparison, right? So when you start making a cup of tea, you will tell me, okay, what all ingredients do you need? What all dishes do you need? Pots and pans. And then you will say step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this. Like, so obviously now this is a step-by-step process. So there is an inherent difference in the way we will write, let's say something that is sequential or chronological, vis-a-vis writing something that is comparative or contrasting or something that is analytical or something that is exploratory in nature, right? So therefore, different articles will take different structures also. So when we write something, we generally, based on the topic of that particular article, whatever is the topic, we decide how to structure our thoughts, right? We decide, okay, para 1 will be this, para 2 will be this, para 3 will be this, para 4 will be this, and then accordingly you start filling it up. So the structure of a particular RC is also very closely related to the topic. So the topic or the main idea, that is what the topic or the main idea is. So the topic or the main idea then kind of determine what the structure of an RC will be. And then given what the structure of the RC is, we take it forward and we make sure that a particular style of writing is adopted and we write accordingly, right? So therefore, when we are talking of the structure of the RC, remember all of these are very beautifully interlinked, whether it is the main idea or the topic, whether it is the structure, whether it is the purpose also, because why is the writer writing a particular article? To convey the main idea. So to convey the main idea, he has to do it in a particular way. That is the structure. So the purpose, the main idea, the structure, all of these are very closely interlinked within the passage. So for anyone who's reading a passage, you have to be able to spot what the flow of thought is. Now remember, when we were doing main idea, we said something very important, that is CFE is what we are looking for. C is the characters or the nouns, pronouns, keywords. The F is the flow of thought, as in what is being mentioned where, and then E is the emotion of the author or the tone of the author. So when we do read, we try and keep a track of the CFE or the coffee, right? Coffee, favorite drink, huh? Not mine, but ho sakti hai. So characters, flow or emotions, तीनों का we must make sure that we know. So the flow of the emotion, the flow of the passage is what the structure of the passage is. If in paragraph 1 we are talking about, let's say, the flaws of modern medicine. In the second paragraph we are talking about the reasons of those flaws. In the third paragraph we are talking of an alternate to this modern medicine. So here is the flow of thought. So characters, flow and emotions are very important. So the flow of thought is what you will be able to, use to identify the structure of a particular passage. So while you're doing your reading comprehension, it is very important that you look at the flow of thought, you look at what he's trying to convey in each of the paragraphs and list it down. Remember, when we do our preparation or when we do read our RCs, we always have a scratch page at hand, and within that scratch page we will do this every time. So P1, P2, for all the paragraphs you write down what he has, what are the characters, what are the flow and what is the emotion. Write all three down. This will, what will happen is, in every paragraph you will be able to see what is being said. So the structure of the paragraph now becomes very visible to you through the flow of thoughts. In the first paragraph this, second this, third this, the flow becomes very visible to you. So then अगर 1 2 3 में ये बोला तो fourth में क्या बोलेगा, this anticipatory question also becomes very easy for you to solve. Now, what is the structure of the RC, like we are talking about, is how is a passage written, and the topic of the passage are very, very closely related. Like I was just telling you also that the writing of the passage is very closely interlinked with the topic of the passage. So whatever the topic of the passage is what will determine the flow of thought and will determine the writing style. Now the writing style can be formal, informal also. So that is the language of the passage that we are talking about. Whether it is formal, whether it is informal, whether it is casual, whether it is comic, whether it is satirical. So that is the writing style. We are not worried about the style of writing. Rather, we are worried about the structure of the writing. So how does the flow of thought happen for our passages? That is what we are talking about. So these are very, very close to each other. Now the various types of structures that we are talking about. So the structure and the topic of the passage very, very closely related. They will determine, each of the other will determine what the other is saying. Now some of the typical structures that you do find in your reading comprehension, and we'll talk about each of these. And while we are going through our reading comprehension in class or here itself also, or in our Hindu session also, we will keep looking at the RCs and try to see what the structure of a particular passage is all about. So, well, the structures could be descriptive, they could be explanatory, an article could be comparative, it could be narrative, there could be other structures also, it could be a listing, it could be an argumentative article, it could be analytical. There could be some other writing styles also in terms of structure. So let's understand each one of these. Now, a descriptive article is generally written to talk about a particular thing, to give you more information about certain things. So it is generally factual in nature. They will give you a lot of facts. Okay. It will also have a lot of description of a particular thing. So that means a lot of adjectives and adverbs, right, will also feature in this. So the descriptive essay will always bring up lots of facts about a particular thing and also a lot of description. So it could be very subjective also in nature. So for example, when we talk of a descriptive essay, we could be talking about subjects such as geography, polity, we could be talking about the resources. So let us say I ask you about the polity of India. Now, if you talk about the polity, you will tell me that there are three parts of the government. We have the executive, we have the judiciary, and we have the lawmakers. So the legislative, those will be the three parts. Then of course, how are each of these interconnected? What are the relations? What is the federal structure? We'll talk a lot about this and we will describe each one of these. So that will be the polity. So descriptive structure generally does not have a specific sequential flow, right? It just talks about different things. It touches upon different aspects of a certain thing and then describes those. So descriptive or exploratory or expository, sometimes you will find these words written. So you may find exploratory or you may find expository also. So these are all descriptive only, right? So these articles. Then you have the explanatory articles. The explanatory article will try to explain why a certain thing is a certain way. So they will bring out a fact and then they will try and see why something has happened, why something is the way it is, and they will try to give you a logical explanation of that. So the explanatory article always starts with a problem and then or an issue and then tries to explain that problem, give proper reasons for that. So it is essentially something and followed by reasons why something has happened in a certain way. So explanatory articles could also happen. So generally in an explanatory article you would have a problem, okay, defined in the beginning, and then you would have reasons for that, okay. So that would be an explanatory articles. So sometimes like that. Sometimes they may just define a problem and then go ahead and explain the problem also. That could also be an explanatory problem. So a definition of a problem and followed by an explanation of the problem. That could also happen. So that could also be a possible structure. Now, sometimes they will ask you a comparison or a contrast also. So it could also be a comparison and contrast structure. Okay, a comparison and contrast structure, guys, you have to understand, we may have either of the two elements. In comparison, please understand, we do a commonality or similarity study. That means we try and find what are similar things between the two. While in a contrast structure, we try to find the differences among the two things. So the articles could be either. So sometimes you have comparison, sometimes you have contrast, and sometimes you have comparison and contrast also. In which case you will try and find the differences between the two also. And that's perfectly okay. So similarities, differences, and or both also. It could happen in either way. So for example, if you're talking about the Indian economy and the Chinese economy, so we could have, let's say, we could start out by talking about the two economies. Then in one paragraph, we could do a comparison. In the next paragraph, we could do a contrast. And then we could sum up by maybe the road ahead or something like that. So that could be a typical comparison and contrast structure. Then you could have the narrative structure also. Now, what do I mean by the narrative structure? Well, the narrative structure essentially means talking about something, but either personalizing it as a story. Okay, that means somebody is narrating it or somebody is doing storytelling. That can be one. Or you can do a sequential date-wise, date or time-based study. So if I have a date or time-based study, or if I have a story that I am telling, both would be narrative. Both would be going back in time and then coming forward. It could either be a flashback or a flash forward. Either would work. Sometimes you have flashbacks, sometimes you have flash forwards. But the narratives follow a timeline essentially. Right? So there is some sort of a chronology that you will see occurring in the narrative. Right? So first this happened, then this, later this, and keywords such keywords are also there that tell you what the time of a particular thing is. So that becomes the narrative article. Now a listing, of course, or a sequence. Okay, listing can also be called a sequential this thing, or it can also be called a step by step this thing. So listing or step by step, you will get stepwise thing. So like I was telling you, if you want to tell somebody a recipe, it has to be a sequential thing. If you want to tell somebody how to do a certain task, it will have to be a step by step thing, and therefore a listing or a sequential method is what is here. Again, the difference between a chronology and a sequence is that in chronology, time is given importance. So you really want to talk about the time. But in listing, it is just the order that is important. So what happens first, what happens next, what happens after that, what happens thereafter. That is what is important in the listing or the sequential order. While in the narrative or the chronology, it is the time that is very, very important. So in that you have to focus more on the time than anything else. So pay attention to that. That's important. Now the argumentative and the analytical essays are very similar to each other. Now in the argumentative essays, generally we give you a lot of opinions about something, okay, but we generally put forward our own perspective only. So it is mostly one-sided. So an argumentative essay is mostly one-sided. It does not talk about two things. It just gives you one perspective, one view, one angle, and so on. Okay, so very one-sided, very single-sided. It tries to persuade you to do something. So the argumentative essay is also called the persuasive essay. Right? Why? Because it is trying to persuade you that the author's argument is correct. Right? So they will always try to bring you to their side. So the argumentative essay will always be very persuasive. They will try to convince you of the goodness or the badness of something. It could be either, it doesn't necessarily have to be just the goodness or just the badness. One of the two will work, but one of the two will definitely be there. So he is trying to convince you. So argumentative is that. So again, you will have facts, you will have opinions, you may have extreme opinions also, and that's perfectly okay. The analytical article, however, is a very strong analysis. So you bring in a fact, you also analyze it from the 360-degree perspective. So the analytical article, and I'm sure you have read a lot of political analysis or stuff like that in our editorials, where they do come up with a lot of analytical articles. Also, research work is very analytical in nature. So when you read a dissertation, you essentially know it is going to be analytical. The hypothesis is going to be analyzed in all possible ways. So it is a 360-degree perspective of any particular topic, how the writer is taking it, and then he will try and look at all aspects, not just the positive. So he's not trying to bring you over. So the difference between the argumentative and the analytical structure is that the argumentative structure only gives you one side of the game, but the analytical structure always gives you both sides of the story. So they will tell you, okay, this is the good side, this is the bad side, here is how you need to take it forward. So analytical will always be like that the writer will always try to give you both the sides, then let you decide, whether you want to go this way or that way. So the author will not try to convince you of the rightness of his own argument, and that's why the analytical article is very different from the argumentative article. Okay. So these are some structures that you do find within your reading comprehension articles. Now there are some more that are also existing. Now these would be problem solution, problem explanation, cause effect. So what will happen in these? Let's also understand these. Take a minute and understand. So the problem solution questions essentially do what? So they state a problem and then they state a solution to that problem also. So initially the author will come up with the problem and then he will say, okay, this is the solution. So that can be one. Then you can have the problem explanation, which was what I was saying earlier also, that problem is defined and then explained. So the problem explanation structure, where you have a problem or an issue that is defined and then it is explained. You may not be given a solution to that problem. You are just given an explanation. What is this? So what is global warming? Somebody will say, what this is global warming. And then they will continue explaining that to you in detail. So that's the problem explanation thing. And then of course you can have the cause effect situation also. So they will give you a cause and then it will be followed by the effects of that. So something has happened and then what are the impacts of those things. So some of them will say, okay, this is just the time that, we have to take a decision on the climate crisis and the steps that a country will be taking, because if we don't decide now, if we don't take action now, this is the brink of no return, or this is the point of no return. After this, we are going to, step into the negative side. We are going to step into that position of the world where everything is going to go bad. And we know for sure कि अब कुछ सही नहीं हो सकता है. So you have a problem, you have a cause, and then the effects of that will be listed there. So that can also be one of the structures that you might find while you're reading your articles. Okay, so these are some of the structures. These were, as we go along in our Hindu sessions and in our classes also, we'll keep learning more about these. Let's take a look, a small passage here. Let's read it and let's try and see what this passage is all about and what is the passage structure. The question itself says, what is the passage like? And then he says, he gives you options. Is it descriptive? Is it analytical? Is it comparing? Or is it narrative? So let's try and find out what this passage is like. Okay, take a minute, pause the video. For all those who are watching it later, you can pause the video here, read, take as much time as you wish to read, understand, and then do it. So let's do this together. So for years afterward, this locality was uninhabited. But finally, Tenaya, who claimed to be descended from Albany chief, left the Monos where he had been born and brought up, and gathering of his father's old tribe around him, visited the valley and claimed it as the birthright of his people. He then became the founder of a new tribe or band which received the name Yosemite. This word signifies a fully grown grizzly bear, and Tenaya said that the name had been given to his band because they occupied the mountains and valleys which were the favorite resort of the grizzly bears, and his people were expert in killing them, and that his tribe had adopted the name because those who bestowed it were afraid of the grizzlies and also feared his band. The Yosemites were perhaps the most warlike of any of the tribes in this part of the Sierra Nevada mountains, who were as a rule a peaceful people, dividing the territory among them and indulging in a few controversies. Not a few, but few controversies. In fact, these Indians in general were less belligerent and warlike than any others in the Pacific coast. When difficulties arose, they were usually settled peacefully by arbitration in a grand council of the chiefs and headmen of the tribes involved without resorting to open hostilities. Now, if you read this article, let's understand. So, this article clearly is not analytical because he does not analyze anything. He is talking to you about how the Yosemite, about this tribe called Yosemite and how it got the name Yosemite also. So it clearly is not analytical and it is not a comparative. Now it could have been narrative, but the narrative also requires a story to be told. But is there a story being told by someone? No. So we are not telling you the story and therefore not really narrative also. So what is this passage like? It is essentially descriptive in nature. It has told you how this tribe got the name Yosemite and what kind of people they were. Okay, so that's the structure of the passage. It is a descriptive passage. Okay, I hope you got that. Alright, how do you solve the structure questions? Let's understand that. Alright guys, so how do we solve the structure questions? Let's understand that. So there is a process to this. Like we solve for all the questions, there will be a process. So first of all, you read the passage. Second, you understand what the flow of thought is. So here, when we are doing the CFE while we are reading the passage, we will be able to find what the flow of thought is. Now, each part of the passage has a function. What is that function? It will either support a point that is made elsewhere in the passage, maybe the main idea, maybe the second idea, right? It may show why two things are similar or different. It may just clarify a point. It may be a step in a sequence. So the parts of the passage are functioning to do something. Now you have to be able to identify what that part is doing, and then within your options, you go to the options and you try and spot the correct answer and also eliminate the incorrect option. So while you're trying to solve the structure question, remember the process remains the same. While we're reading the passage, we will take care of identifying the CFE, the characters, the flow of thought and the emotions. We'll understand what the flow of thought is because once we've got the flow written down, it is very easy for us to see that first paragraph we talk of this, second we talk of this, third we talk of this. And then we will see what that paragraph or what a particular part of the paragraph is doing in our reading comprehension. Okay. And then we will spot our correct answer and eliminate the incorrect options. So that is what we are going to be doing. Now, The question types here could be one of these or could be many of the other types also, but if essentially these are some of the types that you would find. So identify the relationship of ideas or paragraphs. So that could be one. It could be one function of the third paragraph of this passage is to. So why has the writer put down the third paragraph? What is the purpose of the third paragraph? We try and spot that. The third question says the author uses adjective X in line Y to emphasize something. So why does he use a particular adjective in a particular line? What is he trying to emphasize by using a particular adjective? So that which of the following best describes the relationship of the first paragraph to the passage as a whole? So you could have one paragraph and then you could be asked to identify what the relationship of that paragraph is to the rest of the paragraph. The author refers to the to point X in line Y primarily to. So why does the author refer to a certain idea or a certain thought? What is he trying to convey? Or if you look at the sixth question, in the context of the passage, the word X in line Y most closely corresponds to which of the following phrases. So what is the purpose of that particular word or what is that word functioning as? So some of these could be the possible question types that you would find within your comprehensions, which would be the structure questions. Now, let's take a look at this passage and we'll try and solve it together. Again, like I say, for every part of our paragraph, please pause it, understand, read, and then take it forward. Okay. If the 1950s was a sparse period for black poetry, the 1960s more than compensated for it. Well, remember the first line of the paragraph always tells you what the paragraph is all about. So the 1960s compensated for the sparseness of the poetry. That means there was a lot of poetry being written in the 1960s, right? So we are talking about that. During the 1960s, black poets appeared all over the United States. By the end of the decades, not only had poetic giants such as Melvin Tolson, Leroy Jones, Gwendolyn Brooks, Robert Hayden, Langston Hughes reappeared with new volumes of poetry, but also at least 5 anthologies of black poetry were published. Some of the new black poets made their debuts in the anthologies. Others were first published in Harlem's new avant-garde literary publication Umbra. As the decade drew to a close, the broadside press poets appeared through Dudley Randall's series of broadside press editions and in Hoyt Fuller's Negro Digest, which was later known as Black World. These poets brought with them new poetic concepts, a new aesthetic, and a strong awareness of the black ghetto experience. So now in this part of the passage, we talk of the copiousness of black poetry in the 1960s. So the writer says 1960s, there was lots of black poetry being written, right? Just a lot of it. He started off by saying that 1950s, very little. 1960s, there was just a lot of it. There were so many anthologies, new poets, older poets, and so much. And they brought new concepts. So they were bringing in new ideas also, okay? So that is the first paragraph here. Let's go to the next paragraph. Like the spirituals and secular songs of slavery. Remember, whenever the word like, whenever any comparison is given, it's going to be something very important. So something will come out of a line that starts with a comparison. So like the spirituals and the secular songs of slavery, the new black poetry burst forth out of a time of racial turmoil. So uh, this black poetry has come out at a time when there is a lot of racial turmoil. So that means 1960s was a period of racial turmoil. And that is why such a lot of black poetry has come. The catalyst for creativity was a series of events beginning with the Montgomery bus boycott and encompassing the non-violent sit-in demonstrations of the early 1960s and big city riots of the mid-1960s. So the catalyst were these events. Behind the poets and their songs of bitter protest against racism in America were the bombings, the assassinations, the burning ghettos, the screaming sirens, the violent confrontations, and the cruel awareness of spreading black poverty among white affluents. So here, why is there this bitter protest happening by the black poets? Because there is a lot of crime that is happening, there's a lot of things that is happening to the black people, right? So there is a big awareness of the fact that the blacks are extremely poor, they're very harmed, there are problems that are going on, and there are huge differences. So this one now tells us why this black poetry has come. So now see, in the first paragraph we spoke about that there is a lot of black poetry in the 1960s. The second paragraph gives you the reason why there is so much black poetry. Because there is a lot of racial turmoil, and from that racial turmoil comes out a lot of poetry. The third paragraph, the most forthrightly militant representatives of the new black mood in poetry were the broadside press poets, so called because their poems are social, political, and moral broadsides protesting against the body politic and the establishment. So now, who are the main poets here? Before the broadside press poets emerged as a definable literary group, other poets had written protest poetry in the early 60s that was caustic, bitter, and at times moderately cynical. So, other than the broadside press poets, there were other poets also who were very, very harsh. But the poetry became more than bitter militant protest. Under the leadership of Leroy Jones and others, there developed a black aesthetic that, in one measure, prescribed the guidelines for black poetic militancy. So, suddenly now the black poets became militants also. They are fighting for themselves. Under the racial pressures of the late 1950s and the early 1960s, Jones himself had undergone a metamorphosis, moving from an avant-garde aestheticism to a black nationalism activism. So Leroy Jones also, he was a poet, and then he changed. So he had, his poetry had this avant-garde means unusual, very offbeat, sense of beauty, to this very black nationalistic, person. So the poetry became very bitter, very militant. They're trying to free the blacks from whatever kind of suppression is happening. So the third paragraph now tells you who are these poets and what are they all about. In this process, he abandoned his slave name and became Imamu Amiri Baraka. He also moved out of the deeply melancholy and pessimism that permeate many of his earlier poems. So now we're talking of Leroy Jones and saying that when he started, finding this militancy inside of him, he started writing differently. His black art indicates that his pessimism was replaced by a vigilant and militant activism. Indeed, black art announces the credo of the new black aesthetic, that the direct objective of all black artistic expression is to achieve social change and moral and political revolution. Poems, Jones asserts, should be fists and daggers and pistols to clean up the sordid black world for virtue and love. So now the fourth paragraph now talks about a specific person, Leroy Jones, and how he builds this absolutely new kind of militant black aesthetic, which is very vigilant, which is very militant. They're fighting for their rights. So he says poems should be things that clear up the world of its bad side and bring up good things into the world. So very activistic and very militant. So that's your poem, very simple, black poetry, Leroy Jones, broadside poets, right? That is what the poem is all about. And we have moved from talking about, if I take you back here, we talked about black poetries in the 1960s coming up with new ideas. The second paragraph we said it came out of racial turmoil. The third paragraph we said, oh, there was this whole group of poets which was called the broadside press poets, and in them there is one Leroy Jones, and then in the fourth paragraph we talk about Leroy Jones specifically. So you see now from very broad to very narrow, this is how the passage is progressing. Okay, so all right. In which of the following ways is the passage organized? A phenomena is discussed and then further explained by its appearances in history. A trend is described followed by an example of a group that exemplified that trend. A hypothesis is stated then proven through historical examples. A group is praised for its historical merits and then shown to be a part of a larger movement, and a perspective is analyzed and then is called into question. Now, remember one very important thing, that when an answer has two parts, both the parts have to be correct. So a perspective is analyzed and then called into question. That means you doubt it. Similarly, a group is praised for its historical merits and then shown to be part of a larger movement. Well, did we talk of that? One group and then larger movement. Did we state a hypothesis and then prove it through historical examples? Did we describe a trend and then give an example of a group that exemplified that trend? Or did we discuss a phenomena and then further explain that phenomena by showing where it is? So take a second, pause the video, look at the options and then try and solve this question for me very, very quickly. We will be waiting and we will try and understand what this question is talking about very quickly. So tell me what the correct answer should be here. We will not waste a lot of time. We'll quickly take a look. What is this passage saying? What is this passage all about? Very beautiful passage. So let's take a look now. Okay. A phenomena is described and then further explained by its appearances. How many appearances in history? We have just talked about one thought, okay, that of the black poets, and then we've just discussed a group about it. So appearances in history, not really. A trend is described, yes, black poetry is described that it grew in 1960s, and then we talked about the broadside press poets and then went into the specifics. So this can be an answer. I'll put a star to B. A hypothesis is stated and then proven. Well, we did not state any hypothesis, so C cannot be the correct answer. A group is praised for its historical merits, but we did not praise any group for historical merits, so eliminate. A perspective is analyzed and then called into question means you doubt it. So this did not happen. So then the best answer for us should be B, that a trend is described followed by an example and of a group that exemplified that trend. So 1960s black poet movements, how they became more militant. So correct answer should be B, and here it is. Alright, let's look at the next one. It is most likely that immediately preceding this paragraph, the author had discussed. Now, let's understand. What have we talked about? We started off by saying that in comparison to 50s, 1960s had lots of poetry. And then we said 1960s, why they had so much poetry. Then we talked about the broadside press poets. And then we talked about Leroy James, right? Leroy Jones. So now, because I have read this first paragraph which said that in comparison to the 1950s, the 60s had much more poetry. So if I'm talking of a passage prior to this, what should we be talking about? Should we be talking about new periodicals or magazines devoted to black literature? Obviously no, because we're talking of poetry. So this is totally out of scope. The racial atmosphere of America in the 1960s. But we have already done that in the second paragraph. So why would we do it in the previous paragraph? No, so eliminate. Some minor black poets, but we have discussed the black poets here in para 3 and 4. So why would we do it in para 0? So eliminate. Black prose, we can eliminate straight away because this passage is not about prose. So therefore clearly the passage should be about black poetry, and therefore the correct answer will be A. Okay. I hope you got this, everyone, and that you've been able to understand how we have been able to spot that A should be the correct answer. Very clearly the passage had given you a clue also. So that. Alright, so it is likely, yes, the correct answer is A. Okay. Alright guys, so that brings us to the end of this session. Your bonus material is here. I've given you a list of some very interesting books that you should be reading currently. So number 1, How to Win Friends and Influence People, one of the most biggest bestsellers across the universe, not the universe, the world, yes, by Dale Carnegie. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that's the second one. 6 Thinking Hats, very interesting book. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, again one of the bestest bestsellers. The Alchemist by my favorite author Paulo Coelho, gives you a way of life. Atomic Habits, how to structure your habits and how to make your habits better. And When Things Fall Apart, what to do when everything is going wrong. These are some really good books for all of you guys that you should be reading away to glory. Okay. Alright, here is a list of some of my superstars in CAT 21, CAT 22 and 23. You could be here too, guys. Do make sure you're writing your CAT preparation with myself. Okay, quick announcement. Save up to 30% this Republic Day. Join the Aspire for CAT 23 batch today. Prices are rising on February 15. So use my code ABHICAT Live and get this 30% off on 12-month plus and iconic subscription. Congratulations to our CAT 22 toppers. We have a huge lineup of toppers this time. So amazing. The Aspire batch starts on 31st January. I will be taking classes in this batch too. So use my code ABHICAT Live and subscribe right away. Remember, one subscription is required, structured courses, 25,000 plus questions, 100 plus mocks, in-class doubt solving, educated curated notes, and mentorship from CAT experts are all available. The champions batch started on the 18th, but we are still taking admission into this batch. So you can take subscription right away. Use my code ABHICAT Live and subscribe. The CMAT course has started on 25th January. The date for CMAT has come, so you should be writing this. The MASET exam happens on 18th and 19th of March. There are 4 slots, morning and afternoon. If you haven't yet started your preparation, I started my batch yesterday at 8 p.m. Today also at 8 p.m. we will meet and we will cover some synonyms and antonyms. So do make sure you're coming in. It's a very exciting month this time. Code remains the same. Please remember the goal for MASET is different. It is MEH, MBA and CET. That is the goal, not CAT. So please make sure that you look for this and subscribe then. The Unacademy CAT 23 scholarship test happens on 29th of January, 12 to 1. Please make sure you're joining in. The scholarships are huge. You can get from 20% to 100% scholarship on Unacademy. If you are writing GDPI this year, then all you need to do is join our Aspire and Inspire GDPI award batch started on 10th of January. You will be able to get a lot of preparation in this. We have 2 subscription plans, guys, the iconic and the plus subscription. The features are given here. We are taking admission till the 28th. You will take advantage of the 30% off subscription. So please hurry up and subscribe to Unacademy. What's new, of course, you know that I'm doing GDPI course on Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8 p.m. Let's Crack Verbal Pay, Hindu Aeon editorial at 10 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the 99 Percentile Club 9 p.m. Tuesdays and Fridays. Make sure you're joining. In the Plus course is happening. It's a reading comprehension course, 10 p.m. right now. For Mahaset, guys, this is very interesting. For Mahaset, the Plus course is happening at 8 p.m. Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. So make sure you're joining in, and special classes Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays at 5 p.m. Thank you so much. I hope this class was helpful to you. Remember to subscribe to Unacademy using ABHICAT Live. You can find me on Telegram using MBA CAT 23. Thank you so much. Have a nice day, everyone.